Welcome to Truth Seekers Northeast. Now, I don't know why he's so nervous, because he's brilliant, isn't he? So this is Richard E. Wright.
Always right.
Yes. And he's got a BS honours in Earth and Planetary Science. And he's going to revisit Catastrophism. It's easy for me to say, isn't it? So, turn your phones on to silent, please, and we'll have a good night. Or good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'll leave it in your capable hands.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Maureen. Hi, everyone. Alright, some of you might have seen me talk before. I've modified it a little bit, and we're going to talk about catastrophism, which used to be a big part of science until a guy called Charles Hapgood, who we'll come along and talk about later, destroyed the whole field. But it's people are revisiting now and coming to be aware of some of the observations made in the field of catastrophism. You might recognise this guy, Ed Teller. He was there at the inception of nuclear weapons and everything. He said life improves slowly and goes wrong fast, and only catastrophe is clearly visible. And it was clearly visible to him because he split the atom, and that's just one form of catastrophe. Like, I know there's many forms. Here's just a funny cartoon I found on the internet. I think it's great. So you've got the dinosaurs going, oh crap, was that today? And they've missed the arc, because global floods, huge part of catastrophe. And I think Noah's story was told in several different ways. I think it comes from a previous myth in the age of the Sumerians. And today we're going to be learning some catastrophic stuff. Right, so here's an itinerary. It is a bit of a mashup, and I'm going to try my hardest not to make it sound like a school lecture, because a lot of it's to do with geography and geology and things like that. So we're going to talk about a bit of history, a bit of geography, a bit of a legend, or is it? A bit of skullduggery, and a bit of the scary stuff as well. So I do apologise I'm going to try and make it sound just as soft around the edges as I can. So what is a catastrophe? So we've had impacts before, wiped out the dinosaurs, and there was a bolide impact that possibly started the Younger Dryas. We're not too sure on that yet. There's still a lot of work to be done on that. Floods are usually El Nino and El Nina events, which is the North Pacific Oscillation, which creates heavy rainfalls in South America and India and Asia. Earthquakes, we see them all the time. Earthquakes have been quite kind to us recently. The biggest notable one was in 2011 in Japan, which was a 9-pointer, and that was so strong it actually moved the Earth on its axis by 0.1 degree, which was huge. Volcanoes I'll talk about a bit later. It's volcanoes again have been very, very, very kind to us for the past couple of 100 years, and solar events, which is the big one, which we haven't had. We're long overdue a solar event, which I'll get to later. Be careful when you're talking about these kind of things, because when you talk about catastrophes, you get a lot of religious nut jobs. But the end is nigh, and they'll have the sandwich board walking around the streets going, the end is nigh, peddling doom. But you can't put a date on catastrophism. You can't put a date on anything, really, because during the Leonid meteorite shower during 1833, there's a group called the Millerites, I believe, and they had a suicide pact that when they seen the first showers, you'd hear the horn of God, and then you'd take a potion and commit suicide. But unfortunately for them, the town drunk got a hold of the story, and he cycled past with a trumpet, and thought that was a horn, and a lot of them falsely drank their drinks and died. And, like I say, never put a date on catastrophes. Pseudo-scientific myths and mistruths, there's loads of them about. Spirit science, ODTV, and many, many others. It's all that and called peak dipshittery. It really is. There's nothing scientific about it. And there is academic ignorance on the other side as well, massive academic ignorance. We all know Graham Hancock and Rupert Sheldrake suffered at the hands of academic ignorance. Rupert Sheldrake was actually a Cambridge professor and still is. And he wrote a book about a universal field theory, about how your dog knows you're coming home and things like that, all held on like this universal field. And the other professors at Cambridge University, the most academic seat in the world, he's going, it's a preposterous theory. And he said, well, have you read it? We don't need to read it. That's what you're getting from academia and academic ignorance. 2000 we had the millennium bug, where computer programmers made a hell of a lot of money out of fear. 2012, we're still here, aren't we? The calendar just ended and there was some interesting astronomy going on at the time. Dates on the end of world scenarios never come to fruition, as in dates on truth movement big issues, they never come to fruition. Remember last year when we all thought Matt Hancock was getting arrested? Still whacking the streets, isn't he? Right, getting back to catastrophism, it's got quite a long history. This is Jean-André Deluc. What he was trying to do, he realised that there was a flood, but he was trying to prove the flood of Noah, and he was trying to attach it to the Bible and say, look, this actually happened. He's my favourite guy in catastrophism. He's it's Baron Cuvier, Georges Cuvier. He was particularly interested in a bit of stratigraphy in the Paris Basin. This is his original hand-drawn, which is a poor resolution, so I'll bring up the neater one. He was interested in this bit of stratigraphy, and this shows actual epochs of time, geological time. So he realised that at the interface between these strata of rock, that there's been some kind of event where the landscapes changed, or what was getting deposited changed. And I mean, this basement rock that goes all the way back before the Triassic. There's a brief timeline of what we're talking about in kind of ice ages and geography. So around 14,000 BC, the ice sheet started to melt. This kind of, in my mind, lines up with the Adam and Eve story, the biblical Adam and Eve story. It's funny how these things can be manipulated into religions, and they're just stories and stories retold and stories retold again. If you've ever watched, Who Puts It in a Good Way, have you ever seen the first Zeitgeist film? Where he talks about religion, that I think he puts it in a very good way, how they're all just myths retold and told again. The Younger Dryas period, which is kind of, a lot of climatologists focus on that. It was an abrupt climate change period where the ice started to melt and all of a sudden it started freezing again. And we went into another mini ice age for about 1,000 years. And after that, everything started melting again. We had the Boreal period. This is where I think Noah's flood comes from, and the myth of Utnapishtim. We have something in the northern hemisphere. Give you a bit of a demonstration here. It's called isostatic rebounding, or isostatic compensation. So if you've got, say if this is the northern hemisphere up here, so you've got a heavy ice sheet there, so land rises as the pressure's put onto the land. It acts like plastically, it rises and falls. So as you remove that weight, the land falls, and that's planetary as well. It happened all over the planet. So we had a giant ice sheet over around 14,000 BC, so the land's still compensating. All our earthquakes in this country anyway come from isostatic rebound or isostatic compensation. You can see it in your chair as well. When you stand up on your chair and your cushion rebounds, it's the same principle. And in Britain, where we are, the earliest evidence for civilization comes from about 12,500 years ago. And that was by a guy called William Buckland. He was down on the Gower Peninsula in South Wales. He was a geologist and paleontologist. Now, he'd heard from some of the locals that there was some elephant bones in a cave. Elephants in Wales? You never hear of it. So he got himself a rope. He was an intrepid guy. He got himself a rope and he abseiled down there, and he realised it was actually mammoth bones that were 33,000 years old. So Britain was actually part of a bigger continent at one time. We'll get to that. Right, you all heard of Doggerland or North Sea land? I like to use the term North Sea land because I don't like the term Dogger. It reminds us too much of the dogging days, you know. Anyway, in September 1931, a barbed harpoon made of red deer antler was dredged up by a trawler on the Lehman and Ower banks in the North Sea. The object was found in a block of peat and was in almost perfect condition. A radiocarbon date of around 12,000 years was obtained in 1988, the first direct date for Upper Paleolithic human settlements on this part of the North Sea plain. It was the possible home of the Frisians and other Paleolithic civilization. I'll talk about the Frisians in a bit. Yeah, and the thing about when they were doing archaeology around the... Sorry, I'll just recap a bit. What they were doing in archaeology around the time of the Victorian ages, everybody wanted a bit of it and were just sticking spades in the ground without any consensus of what they were doing or how they were doing. They had no scientific method. So I hesitate to say that there's probably more stuff out there that's like even older than we can imagine. It's just the Victorians messed it up with the lack of scientific method. Oh, stop working again. Oh no. Right, so here's a this is just an artistic impression of what Doggerland would look like. We know Dogger Bank was here. We actually know that the Thames, the Rhine, and the Seine were all one river at one point. We know this through paleostratigraphy. We know that there was a massive paleo lake here that's underneath the North Sea, and we know Dogger Bank's there. This is a popular fishing region, and it has been for the past few hundred years. In fact, the term Doggerland comes from the Dutch fishing vessels that were called Dogger boats. And there's the red deer antler that's been dug up. It's actually at Norwich Castle Museum, if anybody wants to go and see it. And since then we've found a myriad of other things that are similar. We actually found the other half of not exactly the same harpoon, but like a very similar harpoon, and that's how it would have looked. Here's another just artistic impression of what Doggerland would have looked like. Britain would look a lot different at the time. And here's another one like this one. It looks like Godzilla's trying to eat the UK. Right, so what might have ended it? Well, the Sterega submarine landslides you might have heard of. There was 3 underwater slides, and they're among the largest known submarine landslides. They occurred underwater at the edge of Norway's continental shelf in the Norwegian Sea. There's a very deep trench just off the coast of southwestern Norway, and it's called the Norwegian Trench, and it's a very deep part of water. That was approximately 6,225 BC. The collapse involved an estimated area of about 840 cubic miles of debris, which caused a mega tsunami in the North Atlantic. And if you were in Orkney, I think we'll have a speaker from Orkney, don't we? Neil Geddes Ward, yeah. I mean, if you're on Orkney at the time, you were looking at waves of like 25, 30 metres plus, just inundated it. Which is, when you get a tsunami as well, you don't just get water, you get sand, you get mud, you get gravel, you get shale, you get all kinds of stuff. So if something's buried by a tsunami, it's not just buried by water. And here's the extent of it. It was a massive landslide, massive underwater landslide. There's another schematic of it. And there it is. The debris came here. Now, when we're talking about Friesland and kind of ancient landscapes, I do actually think it was here, but the Greeks talked about a place called Hyperborea. I think Hyperborea was here as part of the Faroe Plateau. Now what's interesting is this trench here. Nobody's actually done any geology here. Emailed me professor from university, who's he's head of all kinds of petrology departments. And I just stipulated asking if, I didn't throw me theory at him, I just asked him if there'd been any work done on this particular trench, because I think that's a meteorite impact crater, yet there's been no work done on it, nobody's been out there to dredge up any geology. So I think this is what might have ended the Younger Dryas period. I think there was an impact there, and I think it's the impact that Graham Hancock and everybody's talking about. But I think it might have split the Rockhall Trench here. So as you can see, that bit of the Rockhall Plateau used to be on here. And there's been some huge turbidite tide flows that came down here and ripped the land apart. I think this might have been Hyperborea. Yeah, but I think Friesland and the Frisians came from this bit of Doggerland, which was the North Sea, and North Sea land. We'll talk about Atlantis. Worth giving it a mention. I think this is the most likely candidate for Atlantis, which isn't Atland or Friesland or anywhere like that. It's the Azores Plateau, and I think that is the most likely candidate if Atlantis existed, which I think it did. That's where it was, because that would have been above water about 12,000 years ago, as Plato recalled. Right, now talking about the Frisians, where's my notes? Right, so you've got this very ancient, or so-called ancient book called the Aurelinde book. This is it, it's in a museum in Tressar-Leeuwarden in the Netherlands, and it's very controversial. Apparently, It's alleged historical record from 2194 BCE to 803 after Christ, and it's been written and rewritten. If you have an heirloom and it's deteriorating, you're going to copy it down, just as if you read the Oral Lender book. I haven't read all of it, I've read some choice extracts out of it, and it seems it's been passed down through tradition, and you'll see in the next slide that it was rescued from a flood, and the pages started deteriorating, so they had to copy it on foreign paper, which is where all the ambiguity comes from, and all the dissenters of it. They say, well, it was written on paper from like the 1300s, so it can't possibly be this historical record. Well, I'm inclined to disagree, but the only problem is Cornelius over de Linden, he inherited the book from his Aunt Affy. She died before anybody could question her about it, which is where the trail just goes cold, unfortunately. But it's still a very, very interesting document. Like I say, it talks about the history of the Frisians and Freya and Findus. Freya was a goddess, and she was also like, she was a very kind, caring leader of the community, and she had loads of laws and everything, and they seem to be sprung out of seem to be before even biblical laws or the Sumerian laws, which is interesting. But like I say, it's very controversial in the Netherlands. This is how the bad times came. During the whole summer, the sun had been hid behind the clouds as if unwilling to look on the earth. There was a perpetual calm, and the damp mist hung like a wet sail over the houses and the marshes. The air was very heavy and oppressive, and in men's hearts was neither joy nor cheerfulness. In the midst of this stillness, the earth began to tremble as if she was dying. The mountains opened to vomit forth fire and flames. Some sank into the bosom of the earth, and in other places mountain roses out of the plain. Atland, called by the seafaring people Atland, disappeared. That's where I think Doggerland was, and where the wild waves rose so high over hills and dale that everything was buried in the sea. Many people were swallowed up by the earth, and others who had escaped the fire perished in the water. It was not only Finda's land that the earth vomited fire, but in Prix land, which was Germany, whole forests were burned one after another, and there is actually geological evidence for burned forests about 6,000 years ago in Germany. Whole forests were burned one after the other, and when the wind blew from that quarter, our land was covered with ashes. Rivers changed their course, and at their mouths new islands were formed of sand and drift. Now this to me isn't legend. This isn't something that ancient peoples could have like just imagined and made up. This is actual. This is geology. This is real geological stuff. During the 3 years this continued, but at length it ceased, and forests became visible. Many countries were submerged, and in other places land rose above the sea, and woods were destroyed through the other half of Twiskland. Troops of Finda's people came and settled in their empty places. Our dispersed people were exterminated or made slaves. Then watchfulness was doubtably impressed upon us, and time taught us that union is force. Now, like I said before, I think this was Doggerland. I think these people came from a region which is now under the North Sea. And we talk about ancient civilizations and places like Atlantis. Does anybody else think of ancient aliens and aliens moving these big blocks of rock? I don't think so. I think these people were extremely clever humans. I think these people are responsible for moving into Egypt and building things like the Sphinx and the pyramids, but I think the time scales are possibly even a little bit out in this. I think we're talking 12,000 years ago. They moved south, possibly up to 6,000 years ago. Interestingly enough, the last bit of the Dogger Hills was probably covered around 6 BC. I think the last bit of Doggerland was submerged. But like I say, I think these were ancient civilizations who were technological, but they were technological in a way that we forgot. Like I say, they built massive stone monuments. They had good civilizations. They were good to each other. They were a very spiritual race where they helped each other, and they had laws for every single kind of walk of life. But they were always good to each other. But there was these other people who were like very warlike, and they wanted to take everything for themselves and not look after the communities. Yeah. So again, I think they probably came from this region, which was kind of south a bit of the Dogger Hills, because especially around like lakes and kind of ravines and things, you always get civilizations because they're very rich in agriculture. But again, this This is the second last entry of the Auralinda book because nobody made an entry in it for about 1,000 years or so, and this was the second last entry written 803 AD by Lyco over Delinda. And he says, "Beloved successors, for the sake of our dear forefathers and our dear liberty, I entreat you 1,000 times, never let the eye of a monk look upon these writings. They are very insinuating, but they destroy in an underhanded manner all that relates to us Frisians. In order to gain rich benefices, they conspire with foreign kings who know that we are their greatest enemies because we dare to speak to their people of liberty, rights, and the duties of princes. Therefore, they could seek to destroy all that we derived from our forefathers and all that is left to our old customs. Ah, my beloved ones, I have visited their courts. If Riralda permits it, and we do not shew ourselves strong to resist, they will altogether exterminate us." So you see the kind of pressure these people were under to maintain the integrity and to maintain the way of life. This is the last entry in the Auralinda book. I'll come on in a second. This was the very last entry in 1256 AD, and it actually explains what happened to the original book. It said, "Okay, my son, you must preserve these books with body and soul. They contain the history of all our peoples as well as our forefathers. Last year I saved them in the flood, as well as you and your mother, but they got wet and therefore began to perish. In order not to lose them, I copied them onto foreign paper. In case you inherit them, you must copy them likewise, and your children must do so too, so that they may never be lost." So, like I say, that was written by Hitu over Delinda. Now, over Delinda, like I say, it's a very ancient shipping family who came from Holland, and they've had the book in their possession since about the 13 or 1400s, so I believe. Now, it has come under some contention, but here's an old map by Nicola Zeno, which actually shows Friesland. I think it's in the wrong place. I think it's down here. I think he's getting confused with Hyperborea. But anyway, the dissenters. There was a very famous Dutch author in 1871. He was called Edward Douws Dekker, otherwise known as Multatuli. And he was a very renowned Dutch author, and before he'd actually read the book in 1871, he says, "It must be fraud, must be fraud." And 4 years later, he'd actually read the book, and he said, "I know of nobody who could have given the book its literary qualities. The fella who was supposed to have wrote it was a guy called Echo Vigilis, who was he translated the original book, which Cornelius over Delinda gave him. He was mentioned as the possible creator, but Multatuli said, he would be a great artist who could hardly have hidden his talent for so long." I mean, this is a massive document with its own language, and it actually tells you, it gives you a wheel which is from Sanskrit, which goes to an easy run script. It actually gives you the way to translate it in the book itself. And like I say, if this was a concoction by Elko Vigilis and a guy called Francois Hammerschmidt, who was a Protestant priest, apparently they got together and conspired to write this book, which is absolute nonsense. One was a priest, the other one was a translator. How on earth could they give that book its literary qualities? And I totally agree with Multatuli there. And he was dissenting against the members of the Royal Scientific Academy who were dissenting this book. He says, "I dare say the Auralinda book deserves a serious treatment, and the challenge of the pedantic and disdainful members of the Royal Scientific Academy. Would any of them be capable of creating such a forgery? I don't think so." So these stuffy old men in suits who sit around in these scientific establishments, like I said before, there is academic ignorance, and because it seems so fantastic and it goes against everything they've learned for the last 50 or 60 years, well, it's obviously nonsense. Well, obviously it deserves some kind of credit, doesn't it? Okay, that's the end of the geology bit, so there'll be a test at the end. Right.
Are we having a map piece?
No, we're not going to have a map fest. I've taken most of the maps out, okay? Right, so this bit, we're getting into the realms of real catastrophes here. We're going to talk about CIA cover-up, galactic current sheet, superflare, micronova, they're very similar things. Pole reversals, we're going to talk quite a lot about that, impactors and surviving. Right, this is a book wrote by Ken White, and it was the work of his father, Major Maynard White, and he led the 46th and 72nd Squadrons to map the North Pole. At the time, the Cold War was going on, and to find some flight routes over the North Pole was becoming imperative, so they went there with a few ships and everything, and they found a bit more than they bargained for. They found found some tropical corals up in the North Pole, and what were tropical corals doing up in the North Pole? And he came to the conclusion that during the past million years, 43 different areas of Earth's surface have been or very near to the North geographic poles, averaging 1,500 miles distance from each other. And he cites various mechanisms for the pole flip and magnetic reversals, and like I say, Major White died, and it was his son Ken who actually compiled the book from all his notes and all the disclosures that he had. Here's the mechanism that he says for the polar flip. So Earth's crust is pretty much made of a lot of iron. Its average is about 40% iron. So it's magnetized. So when the pole flips, so when the pole undulates and flips, it drags the magnetized crust with it. Now, as it drags the magnetized crust with it, as you see there, the North Pole would become on the equator, and the South Pole would be on the equator, and you've got kind of you've got South America here, sort of like occupying the space where Norway and everywhere used to be. But as this happens, because of inertia, the atmosphere and ocean wants to keep going the same way. The atmosphere and ocean keeps wanting to go east. So as the land slips, the atmosphere and ocean just inundates the whole thing, and this is where you get lands rising and falling. This is very contested, by the way, by modern geology for a very good reason, which I'll get onto. So they wanted to tell the people what they'd found, but they were like, we can't really tell the people. People will freak out and everything, and it sounds quite familiar to what they talked about in disclosing UFOs in the 1950s. So he says, at one scientific meeting Major White attended in the Pentagon in early 1948, the scientists discussed the advisability of alerting the public to the pending polar flip phenomenon. None of the scientists would agree to withholding the information from the public, but on the other hand, neither could agree on how to release it. The knowledge of this phenomenon, some felt, could in itself destroy the moral fibre of society. Bloody hell, man, we're all going to die! So the fears were apparently unfounded. In the early 1950s, information about the flip process was released in both a newspaper column and a magazine article, but surprisingly generated no responses from an apparently stunned, parochial or incredulous public. It seems that today's society, however, with its access to vast amount of information and technological capabilities, should be better equipped to offer sophisticated and profuse innovative solutions that the situation would seem to require. Okay, so the problem here is it's 1948, so not long after a world war, and you've got the inception of the Cold War as well. I don't think people were paying too much attention to geological matters or matters of the earth at the time. Everyone was terrified of getting bloody nuked. So, you know, when it says they did actually release it, it got leaked in a magazine article, but nobody's really taken that seriously. Right, back to this guy, Sir Charles Hapgood. Led an amazing double life, this guy. Now, he did write a lot of books about catastrophism. He wrote books about Atlantis, he wrote books about floods, and he used to talk about a lot of things we talk about, but he did lead a double life. I think that OSS got hold of him, and he was instrumental in making the OSS change to the CIA. Now, he wrote a book called Earth's Shifting Crust, which is, if you've seen 2012, the movie, they referred to it a few times and referred to Charles Hapgood. But he's trying to give people some problems about modern geology and why he thought the poles flipped and the Earth catastrophically moved. But the problem with his book, it had a different tilt and a different pole. It was very easily debunkable. Now, I think he's debunked it because of the CIA aspect of, well, we can't tell the people. So he's put out this absolute shit. He's put out this absolute bollocks about the poles flipping, and it was easy for geologists to debunk. So after this guy took down the whole field of catastrophism with him, nobody talked about catastrophism again until the 1990s. So he did a good job. Okay, and there was another book. At the time, there was loads of books about catastrophism, loads, many different ways. This was called The Adam and Eve Story, A History of Cataclysms. It was a 1965 book, and it tells of two cataclysms. He talks about Noah's flood and the Adam and Eve flood, or the Adam and Eve catastrophe. But why was the book classified, then sanitized for release some 40 years later? If there were so many books about catastrophism, why did the CIA feel necessary to classify the book? Well, they classified the book because Chan Thomas talked about the poles meeting just off the Hudson Bay and the South Pole going to India, which is exactly where the poles are headed now. He knew. There's a lot of crap in his book, but like I say, he knew. Here's a bit from Timaeus, which Plato spoke of, which kind of backs up the whole catastrophism saga. He says, "O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are but children. There is no old doctrine handed down among you by ancient traditions, nor science which is hoary with age. And I tell you the reason behind this. There has been and will be many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes, the greatest having been brought about through earth, fire and inundation. Whatever happened in your country or ours or in any other country of which we are informed, any action which is noble or great in any other way remarkable which has taken place, all that has been inscribed long ago in our temple records. Whereas you and other nations did not keep imperishable records, and then after a period of time the usual inundation visits like a pestilence and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education, and thus you have to begin all over again as children, and I know nothing of what happened in ancient times either among us or yourselves. As for the genealogies of yours which you have related to us, they are no better than tales of children, for in the first place you remember only one deluge, where there has been a number of them, and in the next place where you dwelt in your land, which you do not know, the fairest and the noblest race of men that ever lived, which you are but a seed or remnant. And this was not known to you before many generations. The survivors of that destructions made no records." So they might have made records, but they made perishable records. As you know, in places like Luxor and Egypt, they've got some very firm records that actually chiseled into rock, and I dare say that is the best way to embed history into anything where it's going to survive. Like this is a priest of Egypt who obviously had knowledge of Atlantis and even knowledge of places before Atlantis, perhaps Lemuria or somewhere. But like I say, they're peddling science, yeah. Earth inundation, fire, floods, it happens, it's in the geological record. Yet Plato's Timaeus, and that's been debunked as a bit of, oh yeah, he was just using his imagination. Well, I don't think he's using the imagination. I don't think any of them have that kind of imagination to talk about such accurate geological events of time. We've been lied to. Right, here's a bit of a video, and it shows where the pools are wandering to. Ooh, if I can get it to work. Please work. Fingers crossed. And 10, 9. Oh, it's working on here, but it's not working on there. Right. Okay, so as you can see that the pole's wandering, that's the North Pole. That's been wandering, it changed direction in 1859 after the Carrington event, which was the biggest solar flare we've had in like the last 200 or so years. This is the South Pole, and the South Pole's winning because it's already left the continent. And as I said before, Chan Thomas knew exactly where these poles were going, and they are going to converge in Hudson Bay, round about Hudson Bay and in the Indian Ocean. And that's when the pole's going to flip, allegedly.
When's that going to be? When's that forecast to be?
We don't know. We're long overdue for a pole flip. The field's actually decreasing, which I'm going to get onto next. The field's actually decreasing very rapidly.
I think it's like being alive.
Possibly. I don't like to say yes or no, because as I said at the start, it's really bad to put data. It's going to happen next Thursday. How come it didn't happen? Back in the room. Okay. So the way the magnetic field goes, did everyone remember being at school and doing the bar magnet experiment with the iron filings, where you put the magnet under the paper and throw the iron filings on it and it gives you the magnetic field lines? That's similar to Earth's. Now our lowest shell of that magnetic field line, is the best way to describe it, is about 1.5 Earth radii altitude, which is like, it's past the ionosphere, but it's actually low enough to do some damage. Now this is fell in the last 100 years, and it's not fallen uniformly. It's 500 kilometers below what it was in 1900. It's 500 kilometers below. And when this kind of thing happens, you get these magnetars. Now, everyone's aware that the Giza Plateau is vitrified. We've got a vitrified castle in Scotland. We've got vitrified monuments. Vitrification's where lightning hits rock and becomes like a glassy substance. Okay, these magnetars. Has everyone seen Valley Marineris on Mars? There's a huge scar in the middle of Mars that looks like it's been chopped out by lightning. If you look at some of the electric universe stuff, it goes right into it. But these magnetars, so when there's a solar flare and our field goes down to like a minimum, the sun juices up these magnetars and it'll discharge. I'm going to try and play a video again because it'll be a terrible day on Earth when it happens. Actually, I won't play the video. So like I say, it juices up these fields and you get a huge lightning discharge, and if you're underneath it, you're not going to stand a chance. But like I say, in the geological record, we've got all this vitrified rock and structures, monuments, and we don't know how it's happened, but that's probably how it's happened, I dare say, because we have a solar event once every 12,000 years or so. Let's see. Right, so here's the magnetic events, but basically what I was going to talk about and show you a video of, if you want my last talk, you'll know the video. There's an effect called the Janibekov effect in space, which means anything spinning that's not perfectly rounded will flip over. It's called the Janibekov effect. You can see videos of it on YouTube. Now, when we think about Earth, we've got things, and these are very recent discoveries in Earth, like we're talking in the last 30 years. We've got low shear velocity zones, which are like big plumes of magma coming up at different points in the Earth. Now they're very lopsided. It's almost like Earth's got interior handlebars, and when you apply it to the Janibekov effect, there's something spinning and it flips over and then flips back. There's a very famous video of an astronaut spinning a T-bar thing in space, and every few revolutions it flips itself over. Earth's got those handlebars in the interior mantle, and I don't know if the Janibekov effect can occur in planets or just smaller objects, but it's a very curious effect that you get in spinning things in space.
Richard, you also get that when you flip a tennis racket, you know?
Yeah, it'll do so many flips,
by itself.
and then it'll flip on its own axis to spin the other way. Right, but like I say, the magnetic incursions that occur every 12,000 or so years. We've found the magnetic events in a Gothenburg core, a Lake Mungo core, Lake Mono Lake, La Chance, Vostok and Toba are the most pronounced ones, the most pronounced 6 we've had in the last kind of 72,000 years. We're long overdue one. We are long overdue, and as you might have seen from the animation, I'm quite happy to show you the animations afterwards, just on my laptop. But them poles are wandering. The poles are going to flip. Now, I don't know if what Major White says about the Earth completely tilting, but I think there'll be a pronounced effect.
That's why we have such strange weather at the moment.
I think it is, yes. Coincidentally, did anyone know about the SpaceX satellites that went down a couple of days ago? Yeah, well, they went down because of a space weather event. Now, we did have a space weather event. We had 2 in the last few days. Them SpaceX satellites have put up with 10 times the amount of space weather, 10 times the strength of the space weather that took the ones down. Now, what exactly was happening? The field's collapsing, so all them solar charged particles are acting heavier on the Earth, so we're having more extreme weather events through a thing called solar particle forcing, which was only just starting to be mentioned in the last CIMP6 report. Crap report, whatever you like to call it. But like I say, as long as they can still blame humans for global warming, they're going to stick with that, and they never ever talk about the sun. You never hear them talking about the sun. Okay, but they're the last events. Yeah, like Mr. Burns with his big sun shield, would block it out. Okay, so climate science absolutely fails. Failure after failure. They fail to predict the future. The models have. They fail to predict the past. The massive paleoclimate disagreement about epochs of ice ages and warm ages. The CO2 oversensitivity and bias, it's CO2, it's CO2, it's CO2. It's like a mantra for them, isn't it? Carbon dioxide's plant food. Okay, clouds and aerosol uncertainty. We know from they don't use the solar particle forcing in the cloud uncertainty and the aerosol uncertainty, whereas solar particle forcing adds a lot of electricity, particles and nucleation sites to the skies. The low sensitivity models are favoured. Okay, so it's not sensitive to the sun, don't worry about that. Yes, it is. The urban heat island effect, so it's what's saying is our urban cities create heat islands which at night kind of release that heat and warm the atmosphere, which is true to a certain extent. Anthropogenic global warming studies use flawed models. They use absolutely flawed models, but they know what they're doing. They know they're using flawed models. They just need to scare you and emptying everything out their pockets. And how much will it cost to stop the Earth glowing? You know, stupid. So, melting polar ice triggers an ice age. We know that. So it can be getting warmer, but it's all going to culminate in another ice age. When that ice melts and fresh water goes into the ocean, it shuts down the ocean currents. That's why Britain's so warm. You ever wondered why we're so nice and warm, yet we're on the same latitude as Moscow, and they're bloody freezing because of the North Atlantic current that brings the nice weather. Unappreciated force in volcanoes, as I talked about before. The sun never gets a mention. Cosmic rays. What the bloody hell's a cosmic ray? I hear the BBC watchers ask. The geomagnetic field, which we talked about, never gets a mention. You know, there's a guy actually at NASA, and he famously said the field's decreasing by 10% every decade. A little bit more now. Now he quietly lost his job. They pushed him out the house. Go, no, don't want to tell people that. And the global electric circuit, as I said before, the global electric circuit would be we'll have one anyway. That's where we'll get lightning from. There's like a net positive and negative effect from the ground to the sky, and when these solar flares come, they really juice up their magnetars and really add to the global electric circuit, as does every solar event. Right, this is a volcanic sulfate aerosol injection graph. This was the last big one we had. Does anyone know what that one was? That was Pinatubo in the 1990s. We recently had one in Tonga, the Tonga volcano a few months back. That was about half of that. So when everyone said, oh, it's gonna cause an ice, it's not. It was half the size of Pinatubo. But as you can see, volcanoes have been very, very, very kind to it. And once they start going off, well, the Earth will start cooling. Solar climate forcing versus total solar irradiance. That's all the anthropogenic global warming studies focus on. Total solar irradiance, which they say is 0.1% of the net effect of the heating of Earth. So what they're saying in a nutshell is the sun doesn't matter. When it comes to the heating of Earth, it's only 0.1%. That's because they only use total solar irradiance, which is an effect of ultraviolet light. There was a massive solar flare in 2017. It was one of the most tremendous space weather events on record, with 1,000 times the increase in X-rays and other solar particle forcing, but actually showed us a drop in UV. But as the UV drops, all these other things come bombarding at you, which cause huge effects. But this is why they only use total solar irradiance, because hey, it dropped off during the last solar flare. Can't mean anything. Of course it means something. I don't want to get bombarded with X-rays. I'd rather be bombarded with UV rays. I don't know about you. But like I say, this graph just proves that they're lying. Yeah. Okay, the sun as well is getting hotter. The helium abundance in the sun's changing. We know this because we measured it. And hydrogen fuses into helium. Helium fuses into other elements. As it does, the sun gets bigger and it gets hotter. And we know that the helium abundance in the sun is changing. We can question cosmology. This is just going a bit off like some of my thoughts. Dark matter, what a load of shit. Absolute horse shit. Sorry for swearing, but I've never seen something that's gone on for nearly 80 years of searching. It's never been seen. They don't know anything about it. They just know it's got a gravitational effect on normal matter. What does that mean? Well, the cost to search, billions. Nearly £100 billion they've spent searching for this thing that they've never found, ever. Not even not even a molecule or an atom. They've never ever found it. Not with all the big detectors. Now I'm not taking anything away from things like the Large Hadron Collider and stuff. They do a lot of good particle physics there, but they've never found dark matter, which is why they built it in the first place. But like I say, this is what they call the dark matter milk carton.
Found nothing.
So it's never been seen or detected or anything yet. They'll, oh yeah, can we have some more money to look for some more? Oh yeah, you can.
I was told they haven't found anything.
We haven't. Nothing.
No.
Nothing at all. We found subatomic particles with like colliding atoms together, but that's all you can find. You're never going to find elusive dark matter.
No.
Why? Because it doesn't exist. It's like you've got more chance of finding a bloody unicorn.
Do you think it's to distract from the fact that they've got the models are completely wrong?
Yeah, I think it's quite a bit to do with the fact that they'll have to rewrite all the textbooks, and there's so much hubris in amongst some of these physicists. My theory's right, I'm not going to listen to your theory, my theory's right, his is wrong, give me the funding. And it's about funding, it's about keeping their jobs and, you know, it's keeping their reputations and stuff. But as scientists, as pure scientists, we should be allowed to say, look, I was wrong. Question at the back.
Now you're saying it all doesn't exist. They do cancer research, just still trying to find cures for that. What do it exist? It doesn't, you know what I mean?
Exactly, because it's all a scam. It's a scam for funding. We want some money, we want some grants.
Don't forget the viruses as well. Looking for viruses.
Yeah, looking for anything, right? You have to remember where the money is now. What we're talking about here with physics and dark matter, it's dwarfed in comparison to what, say, the pharmaceutical industry would spend on research and development, or just pulling the wool over your eyes, or just rebranding something like Prozac every 7 years to do something that it's not meant to do, just so they can keep the patent on it. But like I say, in geology, even geologists don't make much money. Geologists have got absolutely no reason to lie about their models and everything, because what I'm happy with geology about is the fact that they are willing to change the ideas based on new information. They have for hundreds of years, and geologists don't make any money. The only way a geologist is going to make any money if he trips over an oil well. Oh, we've got a gusher, rings the oil company, and the oil company will go, right, we'll give you 100 quid if you give with the location. And the geologist will go, yeah, okay. But that's it. There's no money in geology unless you're like a petrochemical company. So same as cosmologists, the only way they can make money is through funding to their universities. So they come up with these cockamamie ideas, and I think it's been a misunderstanding to start with, but for the last 20 years, I think that misunderstanding's just turned into a complete money-spinning object for universities.
You know the Hadron Collider?
Yeah.
In the grounds there's a huge dancing Shiva.
Yeah,
Why is
outside.
that?
I don't know, because I think these people belong to like strange Satyrian cults and everything. And I think behind the more prosaic science perhaps I'd look at, there's like an underlying metaphysical reason why they do what they do. Now, I don't pretend to know much about the metaphysical reasons, but that's why I come to the truth seekers thing. I think there is a correlation between normal science, like physics and metaphysics, if you like. I think the two at the minute, and have been for hundreds of years, like an antagonistic divorced couple. Neither one will speak to each other, and each debunks each other's theories, when what they should be doing is saying, I don't agree with this, but I do agree with this. I don't agree with you, but I agree with sort of what you're saying here, and like maybe come together and work something out. But instead you just get ignorance on both sides, unfortunately. Here's a different version of the sun. We've got told at school that it's a giant ball of hydrogen fusing into helium and heavy elements. Now, there's nothing wrong with the fusion element in this model. This particular model's done by a guy called Pierre-Marie Robitaille, and to my opinion, he's the cleverest guy on earth. He says it's made of the liquid metallic hydrogen model fits better than gaseous plasma. Gas doesn't have a surface, the sun clearly does, and this is what you call a sun quake. And you wouldn't get a ripple effect like that through a cloud of gas. The sun's got a definitive surface, and the condensed matter theory fits many of the observations. This is well in its infancy. I haven't got much information on it at all, just what Dr. Robitaille talks about. This is him. It's my girlfriend's favourite. Dr. Robitaille. I'm also very influenced, and I'd urge anybody to go to some of Ben Davidson's websites. I have his hoodie on here, which is suspiciousobservers.org. He also has quakewatch.net, which gives you the tools to predict earthquakes, and spaceweathernews.com, which is what we've been talking about, space weather, solar particle force and solar flares. But like I say, this guy, does anyone see an idiot on YouTube? He's called Professor Dave Explains.
No.
He's not even a professor, but he made a like 40-minute video trying to debunk this guy. This guy's responsible. You know magnetic resonance imaging. You know when you break your arm and you go to the hospital for an MRI scan. This guy pretty much invented it. So he's one of the cleverest guys in the world, particularly when it comes to image processing, and he looks at new theories in physics and new concepts in physics, particularly astronomy. And if you watch one of his videos, this is why I urge you to watch this guy, right? If you watch one of this guy's videos, it'll go unless you've sat in a physics class in the last year in a high level physics. I understand about 40% of what he says, but he explains it quite clearly. But Ben Davidson's very, very good. I recommend all his websites. There's some of Dr. Robitaille's publications. That Professor Dave who I was talking about, he's not written not one science paper, and he calls himself Professor Dave, and he doesn't even work at a university. So that's what you're up against. Right, here's my conclusion. The current mainstream narrative about carbon dioxide is an overblown, unscientific, money-spinning myth. More importantly, it perpetuates fear. The coming solar event may come tomorrow or in 50 years, but it's coming. When it does, it'll be hell. The few survivors will quickly find themselves somewhere in between a new Stone Age and Iron Age. Sadly, the survivors will be the likes of Bezos, Gates and their billionaire offspring with the advanced technology, whom to the other survivors may seem like gods, and indeed may become the Viracochas and Quetzalcoatls of the new age, the age of Aquarius. It's coming, and they know it. Anyone seen Knowing with Nicolas Cage?
Yeah.
I didn't like it, but it's the closest thing in Hollywood I can say to what would happen during a solar flare. I don't think Martians would come and take the kids to somewhere safe. I don't think that at all. But like I say, there's a big solar flare in there.
What can you see Knowing then? Is it, where's it available?
Sorry?
Where's it available?
Oh, you can just watch it online. It's a film it's a famous Hollywood film by Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, good idea.
Quick manifestation.
Right, so as I was saying before, if you were here 2 weeks ago to see Andrew Johnson, and these, I have to say these are the perils of sitting at the back getting drunk when you're watching somebody's talk, okay? Because you don't really think much. And what Andrew was saying was right, and it goes back to what I was saying is sometimes 90% of a theory is wrong. But because that 90% of the theory is wrong, they don't actually look at the other 10% that might be right. It just gets thrown out with the baby in the bathwater. Now, expanding Earth, I don't think it's entirely true, right? Based on the motions of plate tectonics and subductions. Subduction zones have been measured geophysically. We know there's cold, dense rock hundreds of kilometres down, and we know they follow a defined path. The images of lithospheric fragments with mantle supports, the lithospheric consumption by subduction, the paleomagnetic data which is used to calculate the radius of Earth 400 million years ago, it's nearly the same size as it was now. So with Expand Earth, you'd have to explain where that extra material is coming from. I know he calls it the gas-driven model, but I can't seem to find any information that backs that up. But what he did talk about was an element deep in Earth's mantle called ringwoodite, which is a polymorph of olivine, which you find very deep down in subduction zones. I do believe that is the reason why there's so much water on the planet, and I don't believe the comet theory for the water. I think he's hit the nail on the head with the ringwoodite. I really think that's where the water comes from on Earth. Some of the ancient Egyptian myths talk about water coming up from under the Earth as well, which could explain it. But what mechanisms bring it to the surface, I'm not 100% sure of. But is Earth expanding? I don't think it is, but that's not to debunk his whole consensus. I just don't think I don't think the gas model's powerful enough to do the expansion that it does. So sorry, Andrew, but I do actually go with the ringwoodite. And on one final note, so everyone talks about global warming this, global warming that. If you ever get into a conversation about global warming, get them away from that. Because pollution, here's a river in Indonesia, that's a river.
It's like India.
This is Indonesia, sorry.
Yeah,
But
but I'm saying we've seen the likes of that in India.
yeah, that's what I mean. This is just one place.
Mhm.
Now, we're quite good. We wouldn't have something like that in kind of our country or like most of the Western world, but that's what it's coming to. So when people talk about bloody carbon dioxide and global warming, we can't do anything about it because it's not anthropogenic, but what we can do is use our resources sensibly and keep our water clean and keep the air fresh for it to breathe. And I mean, this is a result, as we were talking about before, Sheila, this is the bloody oil companies again. Plastic is the oil companies. And then they come up with this, sorry?
And we all got microplastics inside where they're
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the problem's not getting any better. It's getting worse because they put these stupid triangle things on to say, oh, you can recycle this, recycle number 1, 2, 3 and 4. It's not, it's just a cockamamie scheme by the oil industry so they can keep using that bloody waste product from oil
Yeah.
to produce shit like this.
I can't understand why can it not go back to being oil? Why can't it be processed back to its basic?
It's an interesting question. I don't have the chemical know-how to answer that, but surely if it came from one thing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I seen a meme and it said about plastic dinosaurs. They came from dinosaurs originally, so they've ended up becoming dinosaurs again because they were made from the oil that was produced by. I don't go for that anyway. I agree with Andrew on that. It's the dino juice thing. It's spurious.
Yeah.
It needs more investigation. But like I say, we need to get away from this kind of stuff. And just the wastage that we produce. It's just like I say. It's not about being conspiratorial or anything like that. It's just about being a human. I mean. Come on. Like I say, we drink that stuff, and why have we got so much microplastics in and stuff? Where's the fish we're eating? Where's the turtles caught up in like bloody ring poles and stuff? It's that's not an option. Hey, I actually recycle my stuff, and I'm actually going to end with a quote from the late great Sean Locke. Now, Sean Locke, he, you might have seen his bit of stand-up, and he was talking about recycling and how he likes to do his bit to help and everything, and he says, well, then I went to America, and he says, the amount of waste there is just unbelievable. He says, me recycling, he says, it's like turning up after a massive earthquake with a bloody dustpan and brush. But, can I help? But I mean, I think that's particularly the wrong attitude, but I think it sums it up quite well where we are. You know, it's if a recycling bin's full, yeah, I'll just hide it in the other bin. You know, we've all done it. But like I say, the waste management isn't top of anybody's priority at all. You know, but like I say, we need to start looking at what we consume and how we consume it. And like I say, it's our planet. It's for our heritage. And as far as the catastrophism thing goes, we're descended from survivors. Those survivors were descended from survivors before them. Humans always survive. It's just a case of how and when. And if you've got the right kind of equipment, like the Bezoses, Jeff Bezos, for instance, he's got a launch pad and a deep underground base within about 2 kilometers of each other, right in the Valley of the Sun in Colorado. He's safe, he can go up or down. You know, and a lot of these celebrities as well, a lot of celebrities are starting to build these things.
Would you want to go underground though if it's going to shift, because they'll just die, wouldn't they?
Well, exactly, and I think this is why they're hedging their bets. They can go up or down. Where would I go? I think I'd rather go up, to be honest.
But how long can they stay up?
Who
And how
knows?
long can they stay down?
I just don't know. But thank you, Truth Seekers Northeast. Sorry, the videos didn't. If you just want to watch the videos, I'm happy to play the videos a bit later.
This is the man I call my son.
My mum died, so I was looking for a new one.
So Anne's new mum. How many years now?
Yeah, well, that's
6.
And then I've got your cat as well, haven't I?
Yeah, social services took me cat.
I've got his cat. WikiLeaks. Who names that cat WikiLeaks? Richard. Richard, you know how we like to give our guests presents.
Yeah.
And you're no exception. Dawn's the exception.
Oh, okay.
You're no exception. And put a lot of thought into this because I know you like your maps.
I do, yeah.
So I've got your picture,
Oh, yeah!
the map of New York City,
New York City, gee, thanks!
and a jigsaw map.
Oh, cool. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, we're going to have a cup of tea. Heckler with the map.
Who knows what tomorrow brings? Who knows if you'll sink or swim? Who knows? Who knows if you get to choose? Who knows if you'll win or lose? Who knows? Who knows would you take that step? Who knows if you'll have regret? Who knows? Who knows what game you play? Who knows, could you walk away? Who knows? Who knows, would you contemplate? Who knows, would you hesitate? Who knows? Who knows, is your conscience clear? Who knows, do you live in fear? Who knows? Who knows when the time is right? Who knows if you'll stand and fight? Who knows? Who knows, will you reach the top? Who knows, will